Hey to all our Laundry listeners, and welcome back for yet another exciting episode. And today we have Kim Grauer from Chainalysis in the studio with us. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Really pleased that you were able to join the podcast. Why don't we start off? Why don't you talk a little bit about your background?
Sure. I am the director of research at Chainalysis and have been at the company for 4.5 years since the early days of the company's meteoric growth. And I lead research. So any public-facing research or things that are utilizing our data set in order to kind of ask more macroeconomic questions. I'm kind of I'm deep in the weeds on those types of issues, and it's more or less taken that form throughout my entire tenure at Chainalysis. Although it's been different teams, the names of the teams have probably been on 10 different team names. And before that, I worked for the city of New York doing research on their economics arm. And it might not seem like there's a logical jump to cryptocurrency, but they were thinking about creating blockchain hubs back then. And I was there for a few years, and before that I got a master's in economics, and that's where I got really interested in cryptocurrency because I wrote a game theory paper on what would it take for cryptocurrency to become mass adopted. And I wrote it as kind of a joke because I didn't like the class, and I was like, cryptocurrency is not fun, so I'm going to show this professor. But then I kind of got really into it. Didn't do well on the paper because I got too in the weeds on mining, but it was still kind of from there. Every birthday I was like, I want cryptocurrency as a present. I will only take that. And so I was hooked, and that was, I don't know, maybe 2013 or something. And so yeah, that's my journey.
And you got to tell us also about Chainalysis. What is Chainalysis?
So even more important than my background is Chainalysis's background, which is a company started 2014 by an amazing team of leaders. We've got right now Jonathan Levin and Michael Groniger, who have pretty much been deep in the crypto space all along, and started a company because they realized that it was hard for cryptocurrency businesses to get a bank account because there are certain compliance obligations that any financial institution has to maintain, and cryptocurrency was so new, there was no way to test where your transactions were coming from. There was kind of this feeling that cryptocurrency was the shady underworld back then, and so there was an obvious need for a product solution. And so what we do, the nature of our business is identifying the cryptocurrency wallets of services. So on a blockchain, you might see if you've looked on a block explorer, it's all the transactions are publicly available on a block explorer, but they don't make any sense. They're a string of alphanumeric letters and numbers sending a certain amount of cryptocurrency to another string of alphanumeric letters and numbers, and we are able to kind of translate that raw blockchain data into something that makes more sense. So it might say, someone or Coinbase is sending money to Gemini, and this is our entire data set. It's based on these what we call attributions, and then we're able to reform that, repackage that data into different forms depending on where you are. So if you're a government customer or if you're law enforcement, you might want to use it to do investigations, to track down someone who you could subpoena in order to find the identity of a criminal. If you're a financial institution, you might use our KYT product, which allows you to determine the source of all transactions that you're receiving to prevent things from sanctioned funds or terrorist funds from being off-ramped at your exchange. Or if you are just interested in research, you might be interested in kind of the macro data that we're seeing, total volumes in and out of exchanges, total volumes between exchanges, and stuff along those lines.
Nice. And you mentioned that you use this data or law enforcement use this data as well to look up different cases. And I know ransomware is becoming big business now. And as opposed to the good old days where, for example, a person would get kidnapped and somebody get a ransom note in the mail asking for money to get the person freed up. Now it's actually cyber criminals who is setting up these ransom notes using ransomware, where they basically hack companies, get sensitive data sets and take that data set ransom and ask the companies to pay them money to basically get the data back. Now, do you have any stories or examples that sort of speak to the level of this problem?
Yeah, well, it's funny you say the good old days, because I was just talking with someone the other day about, the good old days of like the bank robbery where it's straightforward, show up with but now it's definitely more digital. And that makes it feel like you could be attacked from anyone around the world at any given time. And ransomware is a really big problem. We called 2020 the year of the ransomware. We are seeing hundreds of millions of dollars received by identified ransomware addresses, and we know that's only scratching the surface of the problem because people underreport these attacks. So it's underreported, so it's probably way bigger than that, but it is still between 2019 and 2020, we saw this kind of hyper growth in the amount of ransomware attacks that we saw.
Why do you think it's underreported?
It's unreported for a few reasons. One, there's some reputational risk that you might take on if you announce that you were attacked by ransomware, you had a vulnerability, you weren't there's some reputational risk associated with that. Maybe people don't know the extent of the potential damage, and you're worried about share price. So you might not report it to preserve your reputation. You also might not report it because maybe you do report it to your local law enforcement agency, but they don't give us the numbers, or you might just simply not know who to report it to. You might just pay the ransom and just move on. You might not even know that there's this concept of ransomware reporting. You might just pay up and not do anything. So there's a variety of reasons why people don't report.
Understood. So who's behind these attacks?
We found that I think we've got something like 170 active ransomware strains in 2021 that we identified, and that's going to continue to rise for a variety of really interesting reasons. But a majority of the attacks, especially the big successful ransomware cyber groups that have been around for a long time, they're mostly operating in Russia, and they are sometimes known groups such as Evil Corp, which is sanctioned, and they've been not just carrying out ransomware attacks, they've been behind other cybercrime attacks as well, and we've also seen many of these different groups carrying out some of the bigger attacks are originating from and within Russia. Now, that's not the only story. I think we said something like 75% of all of the ransomware attacks have some sort of Russia footprint, and that is how we assign a ransomware strain to a country. Oftentimes, we won't know the name of the people unless there's an investigation or unless there's kind of some known intelligence that we've been given. But we can kind of get a sense of the landscape. So they're operating in Russia. They fund their campaigns through certain exchanges, they use certain services with cryptocurrency, and we know that they use certain forums to purchase their goods. And then sometimes you can get maybe the name of a handle that they're using. So blockchain allows us to paint a pretty interesting picture of who these bad actors are, but you'll need to have some sort of law enforcement investigation that triages the situation with a lot of different data as well in order to figure out the name and who the person is and what their motivation is, where they were born, and all that stuff. Interesting.
And I know that this is even now become a business model where you have ransom as a service that you can order. What is ransomware as a service?
Ransomware as a service is when you historically, ransomware was carried out by the people who built the ransomware. So you would be a person who, a cyber criminal, and you would be interested, but you would also kind of have the coding chops to create malware that could lock someone's computer, and you would also be behind the delivery of that malware. So you would also be in the kind of phishing game, or so what other way you kind of gain access to an individual's computer. So this was all happening within one person or one kind of small group. What the development was, kind of the business development, what they did was they were like, well, let's sell these on the dark web. Let's sell these packages of ransomware on the dark web and kind of bake within the code that we get an X% of every ransom paid to this whole package. And you can see this happening on the blockchain. You can see some of these attacks, an exact percentage is sent to who we know to be the kind of what we call the admin. An exact percentage is sent to who we know to be the affiliate, and you can see these exact percentages of that ransomware payment sent to these different actors. And so ransomware as a service has allowed ransomware to scale, because now anyone can carry out a ransomware attack just buying the package on the dark web. Of course, most people don't, because there's risk associated. You still have to be relatively sure of what you're doing in order to do this without doing something that's an error. But the more interesting thing about ransomware ransomware as a service is really what allowed ransomware to scale. But we're starting to see ransomware, or kind of the as service model, coming into other types of attacks like malware, cryptojacking, phishing attacks. All these things that are not just ransomware but are more broadly within the malware category are starting to move to this malware as a service model as well. So we are actually expecting the malware will be able to scale in a similar way to ransomware over the coming years, because it's moved into this model as well.
Interesting. So what's your recommendations for banks and financial institutions? What should they do to prevent cybercrime attacks like this, or handle them?
Well, I'm not the best person to ask for cybersecurity, hygiene related topics, but I think what I've heard and what makes sense to me is having a kind of a well-defined investment in your cybersecurity team. So you prioritize protection against these attacks, and these kind of basic things really do help. So you educate your team about how to not download phishing links, and education is a big part of that as well. Your cybersecurity team is going to be crucial here. I know our cybersecurity team at Chainalysis is extremely active in education and preventing and kind of creating these filters to weed out spam and whatnot. I don't think there's a silver bullet, but I do also know that when it comes to ransomware, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So if there's one computer on a network that has a vulnerability, your entire organization is at risk. So you really have to kind of pull everyone up and work on cybersecurity hygiene. That's why cybersecurity is such an incredibly fast-growing industry, because it's extremely important, and companies know that they need to invest in it.
Yeah. I was also wondering, with the sort of dark numbers on this, how many is actually paying up? Like, if they are held ransom, do we have any numbers on that? Like, how many companies are actually paying the sums?
We don't know the percentage of people attacked versus the percentage of those who pay up. And we also don't know the percentage of people attacked. Like, we don't know how many people were their cybersecurity filters weeded out a potential attack. So maybe they were the victim, but they thwarted the attack effectively. So that is something that is probably huge. There's probably a huge success rate overall. But we don't know how many people could have been the victim of a ransomware attack, because we just don't have those numbers. That would be an awesome number to have, though, but we don't have those numbers. And we also don't know what percentage of people who are attacked by ransomware, maybe they have their files backed up and they just kind of throw away their computer and they're like, I'll just eat the cost and I'm not going to pay the ransomware, but it's okay because everything's backed up. That is another thing you can do to protect yourself, is make sure everything is backed up. So if your computer is attacked, you won't at least risk losing everything, because we do know some ransomware attacks don't effectively decrypt your computer after you pay anyway. So it's not that common, but it does happen, especially if there's kind of a geopolitical element to the attack where they are more interested both in financial gain but also disruption. So there might not even be a way to recover even if you do pay the ransom. So backing up your files is really important. And some people might have everything in place, their files backed up, and they are attacked, and then they might just say, hey, you know what, I'm not going to pay this person. I'm just going to wipe my drive and kind of re-download everything. So all that to say, we don't really know.
That's super interesting and a great tip though. Always have everything backed up and try to encrypt as much data as possible. Now, lastly on this topic, I wanted to ask, if a company is held ransom, would you recommend them to pay?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. And I go back and forth on that, because you have to have a tremendous amount of empathy for the position of the victim who has their entire life locked up, and their entire business might be impacted, and so they might just genuinely need to pay in order to survive this attack. But I also have sympathy for the other argument, which is we're just enabling this. I asked a cybersecurity professional, I was like, why is it scaling so much? Why is ransomware growing so much? This is crazy. And they do say, the ransomware as a service model is what allows it. But they also said, read the news. Every day people are saying millions of dollars received by a ransomware criminal. So if you're kind of a young person who has coding skills, you might see that as, oh, I should get into ransomware. And so one of the reasons that they say the ransomware is growing so fast is simply because it's everywhere in the news that you can make so much money this way. So and so if we prevent people from paying, there is a long-term benefit in the sense that maybe it will be faster to stop the attacks. But I don't know what the kind of the best social outcome is. It's kind of almost philosophical, like utilitarian versus, for the whole community. So I don't know, but I do know that the regulators are really grappling with that exact question.
All right. So let's jump into cryptocurrencies versus fiat as a means to launder money. We are on the Laundry podcast, so we are obviously into that. So what are the most common ways of laundering money using crypto, if we just start there?
I think the first point to make is that every type of crime that we track launders money differently, and even more granular than that, every group launders money differently. So there are generalizations that you can make and you can see with our data. So what are those generalizations? Let's look. What we do every year with our crime report is we put together all of the wallets that are illicit, tagged as illicit, darknet markets, fraud shops, ransomware, stolen funds, all these wallets that criminals control. And then we say, we have this amazing algorithm, it's called indirect exposure, that traces through all the paths that those funds take to off-ramps. I don't know, kind of like a Google map looking at all the different paths that you could take in a car to a destination. It's probably a bad analogy, but yeah, it resonated with me when someone said that once. And we say, where did all these funds wind up? And what we see is that by and large, they tend to wind up at exchanges. In the past, it's been low KYC exchanges. Now it's still a few exchanges. It's also mixers are an increasingly popular destination for illicit funds. DeFi protocols are Also increasingly utilized, this was one major finding in our report, criminals are turning to DeFi platforms as one stage in the money laundering process. The reason for that is likely that we saw a lot of people were stealing random tokens this year. And hacking was so what do? You have these 1,000 stolen bad tokens.
That's completely fine.
No problem in Norway, actually.
Okay. Thank you. You never know.
Yeah.
But and then what do you do with them? You have to use other DeFi protocols to convert them into maybe a wrapped ETH or wrapped Bitcoin or something, because a lot of people don't accept like the most random tokens. Oh yeah, here we'll take this token that was listed yesterday. So DeFi is another big part of that as well.
So one famous case is the Russian cryptocurrency OTC SUX receiving and laundering over $160 million from ransomware attackers, scammers, and Darknet market. So what happened here?
This one's really interesting, if only because it's actually a part of a greater issue, which is that we were able to pinpoint not only that this was Russia, but this is within Moscow City. We know exactly where the SUX is. It's in a place called Federation Tower East, which is actually a very beautiful, tall, big tower that does sell penthouse real estate. And I did look online and was like, that's pretty nice. But we actually identified dozens and dozens of businesses registered in this building and in Moscow City in general that have the same profile as SUX and are moving lots of fraud, darknet market, ransomware money. SUX was notable for the amount of ransomware money that went through it. And so all these businesses are headquartered in Federation Tower East in Moscow City, moving large quantities of money, and we're seeing it happening. And so we're able to pass this information onto organizations such as OFAC, and they're able to use blockchain analysis to see this happening, and then they slap a sanction on these addresses, and then all of the activity is effectively shut off. There's a greater question of where does that activity go? Does it cease? Or is it a whack-a-mole problem? We've been trying to use data to answer this for a long time. I think it's I think there's not one answer. I think that what we've seen is sometimes it does seem to shut activity off, but sometimes you are able to see, a counterparty of SUX is now sending money to a new deposit address, and we can see this happening and analyze it. A limitation is we don't get to ask the intention behind the transfers, so we don't get to say, why did you start transferring your money from SUX to this other thing? Was it because you're of the sanctions? We don't get to ask that. We can make assumptions about activity, and that has actually been really important in our research on sanction evasion since the Russia invasion. But yeah, so SUX is and then shortly after SUX there was ChatX that was also sanctioned as well for similar reasons, all in Moscow City, moving all this illicit money.
Yeah. And just for our listeners who might not know, could you explain what Darknet Markets is?
A Darknet market is like an Amazon shop on the Tor that operates on privacy browsers like Tor, where you can log in and buy any illegal item your heart desires. And I don't recommend this necessarily, but there was a part of my career where I had to interact with some darknet marketplaces. I had to learn about them just because we're publishing on darknet marketplaces. And so I just started to make accounts on darknet marketplaces, browse around, and that really helped me kind of wrap my head around what it is. And what it is basically just an Amazon shop operating on Tor that sells illegal items that you pay for using cryptocurrency. There are many out there. And there are some that specialize in just marijuana. There are some that specialize in just stolen credit cards. There are some that do anything that your heart desires, from fentanyl to a grenade launcher. And these all are have different names, different marketing strategies, and we track their wallets, their wallet infrastructure, and are therefore well positioned to say how active they are, and how many customers they have, how much money they're receiving over time.
Another interesting example is the Ronin case, where 600 million was successfully stolen, but the criminals ended up sending the funds to legit crypto exchanges to try to launder it. So what happened here, and what are your thoughts on this case? And also just maybe give some background to our listeners who might not know of this.
Ronin was a bridge, a DeFi bridge that was hacked I think a few days ago, and there is unfortunately we're the investigators on. I mean, fortunately we're the investigators, but unfortunately that means that I can't really comment on the details of the case publicly. They are doing a really good job, though, of describing what exactly is happening and keeping people appraised of what happened overall. But essentially, this is a bridge, which is it's kind of functionally creates interoperability between blockchains, and which allows you to move. We have many blockchains now in this space, which is a headache for me because it's the second you have a new blockchain, you need to ingest all the data on the new blockchain, but also interpret it properly. And so this allows you to move cryptocurrency across blockchains. And this is, like many things in DeFi, is a target for hacks through a variety of different mechanisms. But essentially, what people are doing is targeting DeFi more broadly, and bridges are kind of one subset within the greater attack on DeFi from hackers. And there have been several other bridge attacks. Wormhole was another extremely large one, but there's more beyond that as well. And it presents, I think, the interesting thing about the bridge attacks is there's a systemic threat with these bridge attacks, which is that if you're creating a link between two blockchains and one blockchain has a vulnerability, then you can impact the other blockchains. And if there's multiple blockchains connected to each other, there could be this cascading impact of the blockchain that had the risk, and maybe they were holding tokens from another blockchain, and then there was a glitch and all those funds are gone, then the funds on the other blockchain are gone as well. And so this is a discussion that people have been talking about for a long time. I think Vitalik really highlighted really broke this out really well even before Wormhole, and talked about the pros and cons of this situation. And that was a problem that we narrowly missed a major issue like that with Wormhole. But with Ronin, unfortunately, I can't get into more details of who's controlling the funds and where they're going, even though it sounds like you all already know.
Yeah, that's the interesting part about Ronin. I understand that you can't comment to this, but it's interesting to think that in modern day and age, you're able to hack and get away basically stealing $600 million, but you don't have the sophistication to use the means, because you're actually sending them directly through a common used crypto exchange. Now, painting the picture, it's almost like you walk into a bank and you tell them open the bank vault, and you take $600 million worth of gold bars in cash, and then you just head into another bank telling them, I want to deposit these funds. Would you agree on sort of the painting of that?
Yes and no. I think conceptually, yes, it's the same thing. I don't think that there's much of a conceptual difference between an in-person heist and a digital heist. But in terms of tracking the funds, I think it's much harder to move cryptocurrency than it is to move stolen cash or gold bars, because look at what we're doing. Everyone at my company has alerts on these stolen funds, so that whenever they move, they get a notification. We watch exactly what these people are doing. We're watching them take their money, the equivalent of walking to a place next door, and we're seeing them what they're trying to do, and then we're able to tell law enforcement this is where you go to find the person. So cryptocurrency is way more transparent than people, I think, realize and appreciate. I think because of the early days of, there's this anonymous cryptocurrency. I think that's really lingered, when in reality it's anonymous. It's not pseudonymous. So we know that it's not anonymous. It's pseudonymous, and so it's hard to get away with the money. That's why we see all these white hat agreements after hacks happen, where someone agrees to give back the money, or we'll see them sit on the funds for long periods of time, or flood a mixer. But I mean, of course, sometimes people do get away with it, but then years later, like what we saw with Bitfinex, then all of a sudden law enforcement has had enough time to compile a case, follow the money. Then 4 years later, I don't know if you guys remember the Bitfinex, the RoselCon event that just happened, but essentially there was a hack in 2016 from Bitfinex, and just a few weeks ago, law enforcement made the arrests and seized the money. So even if right now the hacker gets away with it, who knows what's going to happen in a few years.
Interesting. And that's one of the beauties about cryptocurrencies, that you actually have an end-to-end trail, usually with destinations of every single transaction, because it's on the blockchain. Now, you spoke about mixers or tumblers, as some people call it. What is a mixer, and could you sort of give a visual example of how a mixer would work?
There's a lot of mixers out there, and they what a mixer does is it is kind of the industry solution to what we do, which is we trace funds, but what if you don't want to have someone trace you? What if you, maybe for ideological reasons, maybe just you're a computer nerd, maybe a computer nerd. I imagine it would be a computer nerd who just out of interest is like, I'm going to go through a mixer. But or maybe you're a criminal with funds who you want to, there's a variety of reasons why you might use a mixer, but the one that we focus on the most is when a criminal has money that they need to, they want to convert into cash somehow, but they're worried about blockchain analysis companies like us, so they need to do something. What do? They use a mixer, and a mixer will essentially, using algorithms and more kind of advanced processes that are applied to the blockchain, can break your connection with the fund. So you send money to a mixer, and then the mixer essentially cycles the funds around between addresses in a statistical way that will prevent you from being able to associate the inputs to the mixer with the outputs to the mixer. So you send money from ransomware into a mixer, you receive money, hey, maybe from an exchange. And so it breaks that connection. Now we identify mixers in our product. So what you would actually see if you used our software is, so this person is moving money from a mixer. And then they're able to send that money to an exchange and break that initial connection with the inputs to that mixer.
Would a simplified explanation of this being almost as a person having gained some illicit money from criminal activities, walk into a casino, and then they place the money into the casino, and they end up gambling all night, and then maybe they win some, maybe they lose some, but let's just for simplicity's sake say that they win exact the amount they put in. So they walk away with some money from the casino, and there's no way of knowing if that's the same sort of dollar bills that they put into the casino when they actually started gambling.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what's happening.
Brilliant. And just to speak to, what type of problems does this lead to? Like using mixers, are there any big problems we see occurring now because this is gaining so much traction?
I think the problems are that makes it harder for the criminals to be traced using blockchain analysis. And so it adds another layer of complexity to an investigation. And we have demixing products at Chainalysis that apply to some mixers, but it definitely is a new dimension that law enforcement has to deal with if they're running a blockchain investigation. And one thing that I've heard happening is that maybe exchanges might lower their tolerance of receiving funds from mixers, period, the end. So basically, an exchange might treat mixed funds like illicit funds and not accept them. That's yet to unfold. I've heard it happening in some instances. I think that what's more accurate is a compliance officer has a risk tolerance, and if they're only receiving money in structured payments from mixers, they might off ramp or freeze that account. But if it's occasionally mixing, occasionally all these other things, then maybe they're less likely to do anything around that. But mixers come up all the time. Mixers are used by bad actors too. North Korea hackers are prolific use of mixers, and we see them steal funds. We see them flush a mixer basically within hours. They don't care about if we can trace through the mixer or if we can find out who they are. They just want the money. They just want the money. They just want to get away with the money. A lot of people don't care if we can find who they are in some of these, especially if there's a jurisdiction that we say we can see all this stuff happening in Russia, for example, but are they gonna, what do? We just point at them. They have to be arrested. So there has to be some kind of nationwide approach to cracking down on crime. But with North Korea in particular, they don't care at all if we can trace what they're doing, because they just want to get as much money as possible and continue to hack and continue to get that money as quickly as possible from a victim to maybe cryptocurrency. We actually have found that North Korea is sitting on quite a lot of cryptocurrency right now. I think $160 million worth of cryptocurrency as kind of a long-term investment, which is interesting.
Do you think that people that have used mixers will regret it in the future? Like, let's say regulators put a strict no on any wallets ever involved with mixers or these type of scenarios?
I mean, I don't know. I think that there certainly are some cases where a law enforcement officer has been able to crack a case later on because of technological advancements that have occurred that they didn't have access to during the crime that popped up years later. I mean, we've seen that happening where the technological developments law enforcement can kind of retroactively go and investigate a case. So that's certainly happened and could happen with mixers and with other. The point is, I think the interesting point that you're getting at is that all of the crimes that you carry out are forever footprinted on the blockchain forever and ever and ever. So if you transact with a Darknet marketplace using cash, and there's no like CCTV, for example, that's done with. Maybe there's going to be no record of that happening, but that transaction will always be recorded on the blockchain forever. So there's not, so long as the blockchain kind of exists, there will always in 200 years be that record of that one transaction that happened.
That would be terrible. Like, imagine having a wallet and just 1% of your funds has been involved with some sort of mixing, and it doesn't have to mean that you've done anything criminal. Maybe, as you mentioned, you would, from an ideological standpoint, or you just wanted to test it out, or similar. You for some reason went through a mixer with parts of this fund, say 1%, and then one day regulators say, no, we do not want any sort of involvement on any sort of wallet that's ever been involved with a mixer, and basically have all funds frozen on that exchange at least. Do you think that's a hypothetical scenario that could happen?
I would find that, I mean, I'm definitely not the person to ask for that, but I don't think that's how things work. I think that you could develop I don't think you would retroactively look for mixer kind of exposure and then retroactively freeze that account. I think it might be kind of a more of a forward thinking policy. And also, if you do for legitimate reasons use mixers, I don't think you really have anything to worry about other than just maybe being like I don't see an exchange just freezing funds because of because of an exposure to mixers. There also needs to be kind of a greater law enforcement investigation that that is maybe why they're freezing funds, or why oftentimes they'll freeze funds just to ask for more information, or if you're not responding for more information. So I don't see it as kind of this big brother state where they can just make an arbitrary decision about what their risk tolerance is and freeze all accounts retroactively that don't comply with that. That would be, to me, a kind of like a scam. But we do have a lot of exchanges that are scams. And this would be the rug pull where someone just decides that one day that there's all this money in custody, I'm gonna run away with the money and kind of pull the rug on all their investors. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but it's certainly an interesting one.
Yeah, absolutely. And final question on this theme is, with more and more stores accepting crypto as a payment, do we think it's going to become an increasingly big problem that actually criminal gain funds will be used for direct payment for services and goods moving forward, now that it doesn't exactly need to flow through a crypto exchange?
Yeah, it's a good question. We are seeing this happening with cybercrime groups who are able to carry out a lot of their cryptocurrency kind of illicit activities on the blockchain. So rather than needing to convert to fiat and then purchase a VPN service, they can just purchase the VPN services directly through the provider of the VPN service provider, or they can. So there more and more of, this is especially true with criminal activity, and I think it's actually where you can purchase more of the stages that would be needed to carry out a ransomware attack on the blockchain. It's great for modeling out the entire business of a ransomware organization. And law enforcement, for example, that's really important for law enforcement because they can kind of go after the top dog rather than through kind of this coherent this complete understanding of how the organization works, rather than kind of the low tier people who and that is more impactful. But it's harder because then there's less off ramps for the funds. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of the criminals are interested in that payday that comes from the exchange fiat off ramp. So I don't know if that's going to change, but we are, especially with cybercrime businesses, seeing more and more of this whole business carried out on the blockchain. A stat I don't think we've released the stat yet, but the amount of merchant service e-commerce activity using cryptocurrency is growing really fast as well. I think it almost doubled from 2020 to 2021. And so it's not huge growth like what we're seeing with DeFi, and it's not a huge amount of activity, but it's still something that's steadily charging forward, and it's healthily growing. So I think that will probably continue as well, especially in other countries, where there maybe El Salvador, where there's the official cryptocurrency is now the official currency is now Bitcoin, and other countries like Nigeria, where we see a really strong amount of cryptocurrency usage already, and with merchants who just accept cryptocurrency directly on their phones through like a downloaded wallet. I think that will grow in certain countries. Maybe I don't quite know what its future is in like the U.S., for example, but we've seen the demand in some of these other countries, maybe low and middle income countries, where there's a lot of crypto adoption to you hear banking unbanked, you hear people left out of the financial market, and I think crypto is not as much as we would like to see, but is serving those populations with increased frequency.
That brings us brilliant over to sort of the next theme. And now one of the key aspects of cryptocurrency is that it's decentralized and it increases transparency on funds. The EU is now voting about KYC on cryptocurrencies and especially on non-custodial wallets. First off, what is a non-custodial wallet as opposed to a custodial wallet?
A non-custodial wallet, I believe what you're referring to is just a individual's wallet. So why do we call it non-custodial? Because you're not having someone else custody your funds. You're holding them yourself. Non-custodial, unhosted personal wallets, however you want to call it, are just your own wallet where you're managing and self-custodying your own cryptocurrency. And this is something that regulators are extremely interested in. Data around what are these personal wallet networks looking like? How much crime is going through them? How do we regulate them? What even are they? And I think regulators are really trying to wrap their head around this issue right now. It's a complicated issue. We've heard some extreme regulatory responses to them, and some that are the opposite. So yeah, I don't quite know where that's going to land. I think that regulators are in kind of an information gathering mindset right now.
So it feels like it's almost like what non-custodial wallets is the cash in your pocket. Meanwhile, custodial wallet is the bank card or the credit card that you have in your pocket. Where the bank could have access to the data and understand where is the funds actually heading from and to and so forth.
Yeah, exactly.
But what are the problems that we see? What are the problems that more strict KYC imposed on non-custodial wallets will provide?
What are the problems of too strict regulations on unhosted wallets?
Yeah.
Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to have a policy or regulations that are needed and helpful, and you don't want to kind of overburden any industry with regulations that wouldn't be helpful, that would just kind of stifle growth. And I think if you again, caveating this with I'm not a regulatory person, so I'm more on the data side, and I can speak to what we know about the data around unhosted wallets. But I think that that's the concern, is that over-regulating a new industry, especially one that's so global, and we're seeing countries all over the world kind of leaning into cryptocurrency. And I think that you might run the risk of stifling development or innovation in some way. And so if you restrict this activity too heavily, it might have the effect of just overburdening the industry altogether. And then on the flip side, it's this fear of what is really happening with these unhosted wallets, with these personal wallets. How are people really using them? Are they all just used by criminals who are facilitating Russian oligarch money to be sent abroad? It's kind of the more fear-based approach towards cryptocurrency. I don't know which one is. Every regulator, I think, comes from a different kind of background and kind of approach towards these topics. And so what we do is we provide data to help regulators understand this problem. And I think that we've put out these kind of percentages of how much illicit activity is happening. What we found in just a one-off take on trying to answer this problem, and we haven't published anything official yet, but something like around 2% of personal wallets are coming from illicit activities, and of course there's a lot of variation within that. So what we can do is provide regulators with the data to answer these questions, so it's not based on anecdotes or things that they've read that are stories about another story. Rather, this is the data that you would have to be able to answer this, and we're extremely forthcoming with putting out our data, talking about the caveats, I think because our leaders have recognized that the industry they just need data at this point. That's what they need. That's what the industry needs to grow.
Great.
All right. So let's just move into like some final questions and more on practical take on crypto trends. So what are the top trends in crypto crime these days and what's next? Just like short overview answers.
DeFi, the criminals leaning into DeFi to launder and to launder money and to attack DeFi platforms. Scamming is always going to be the biggest source of illicit activity. I think those are the two kind of things that really stand out.
Yeah. So what are your top 3 tips for financial companies wanting to stay compliant and are just sort of setting up their AML and compliance processes to support crypto?
I would say hire a good team. Honestly, that's the most important thing, is getting good talent that knows the industry and has kind of an eagerness to dive down every rabbit hole. Get good compliance software like Chainalysis. I hate to say it, I know it sounds salesy, but it's one of the most important things you can do is get good software to help you scale your compliance programs. I think that, and I don't know. I think those are the two. I'll stick with 2.
Two good tips.
Yeah.
And then also, what's your best argument for crypto being safer than traditional fiat for AML?
Oh, 100% is traceability. That it's all traceable. I mean, we've talked about that a lot in this podcast.
It's not that surprising. But then on the flip side, what's your best argument against crypto then for AML purposes or in the AML context?
I think that, so against it being a good thing for AML, right?
Yeah, I was just like, on the flip side, traceability and transparency is like the best argument for
I think
being
it just
safer
makes
than
it,
fiat. But then on the flip side, the critics, what do they say?
I think that it just makes it so quick to do payments across borders and internationally that all of a sudden you have this way of receiving payments from someone you attack in a country all the way across the world. So even though it's more traceable, criminals understand that this is a good way to get money from people whose computers you lock up because you get it instantaneously. You might be in a jurisdiction where people don't care if you did that, and it just I mean, it's the same reason why we saw Ukraine accepting so much charities using cryptocurrency, because it's just let's get that money instantly into Ukraine.
All right. I don't think we had any more questions.
No, I think that's it for now.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming on The Laundry. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate it, Kim.